what most people are raised in is the kind of educational system that John Dewey came up with, which is designed for training cogs in the economic machine or the political machine.
Right.
So, and now conservatives think the goal is to raise the people into the economic machine, and liberals think the goal is to raise them into the political machine, but they agree that people are being raised up to become cogs in the machine.
Jason, thank you for joining me on A Flames and Crowns today. I've been looking forward to this one for a long time. I kind of want to bring all my favorite friends who cause trouble on this battleship with me. So thank you for
it's all an accident.
It's all by accident.
All the trouble that I've ever caused.
It's not like we try this at all, you know? It's true, though. I mean, you're a nice guy. You consider people's feelings for the most part, you know?
Do my best.
Solid. Jason, just as a way to get this kicked off, tell us a little bit about yourself. I can give you my own sort of ring announcement if you so wish. You know, Jason Farley, heavyweight champion of the world.
Dodgeball champion.
Dodgeball champion. That's what it is. That's what it is.
Yeah, Jason Farley. I have done a lot of different things, from pastoring to comedy writing to working in classical Christian education, to screenwriting and teaching, and just sort of bounced around and done whatever was necessary at the moment.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a very humble introduction, because I think the quality of what you do is incredible. I think the Lord has given you rich insights, and I'm hoping to mine some of that today. One interesting thing about you is you did live in Moscow.
I did. Yep.
And actually, you now live in Moscow. I mean, from the time that when this is going to air, you're going to be in Moscow.
Yeah,
so that's an actual thing.
We're in the process of moving here. Yeah.
Right. And you have one daughter who went to NSA, if I'm correct.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
At that time, why NSA? Was that something that was on your mind? Is that where you wanted her to go? What was your thinking behind that?
So as my daughter was looking around at schools, there was a short list of schools where she thought her faith would benefit, if she went and got an education there. And as she visited schools, sitting in on classes and things, she sat in on Jason Greaser's class and walked out and said, "I'm going here." Right. And just the connection with the quality of professor, with the love of literature and poetry, just in the context of my faith is going to grow here. That's what sold her, was the professors. As having those professors as professors was what sold her.
Good. Did she enjoy her time here?
She did. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. That's excellent. So if you had to explain to someone who's never heard of the concept of Christian liberal arts before, what's your elevator pitch to them? Like, what is this stuff? Like, that sounds like a complicated word. Are we talking liberal? Like, are we supposed to be liberals as Christian? What's going on here?
Yeah, the liberal arts are, when we think of education, we don't make the same sorts of divisions that they did in the past. So in the Middle Ages, when you talked about education, you would break down knowledge and understanding into the sciences and the arts. Right. And the liberal arts were the ways of thinking that gave your mind the freedom to navigate the world God made. And so it's different ways of thinking, or different avenues or modes of thinking, that make it possible for you to be difficult to manipulate, to have the freedom to live in the world, and the freedom to think from multiple perspectives, so that you could make wise decisions and get hold of the world and transform it the way God wants us to.
Amazing. What does that look like in practice? Like, as you start to develop a pedagogy, what does that look like specifically?
Yeah. So if you think of, you've got the 7 liberal arts, which are language arts and mathematical arts is probably the best way to think about it. So with something like geometry, you are learning to think about space and the way space works, the way space is measurable, manipulable, all of those sorts of things. So when you study geometry, you're exercising your imagination to be able to think not just in images, but to think in images that you can manipulate within your imagination, but also think in 2 dimensions, think in 3 dimensions, think beyond that. So when you get to something like, when you're talking about, like, let's say, Kuyperian political philosophy, and you start talking about spheres of authority, spheres of the different spheres of life. A sphere is a 3-dimensional object, right? And so by being able to think in 3 dimensions, you can think about authority, not just in flat planes in terms of power, but you can think in terms of overlapping jurisdictions. So the spheres of authority that Kuyper talks about, they exist like nesting dolls, right? You've got 3-dimensional spheres nesting inside one of another, and that's the way God has designed authority. So by studying geometry and exercising your imagination in the realm of geometry, learning to think 3-dimensionally, it gives your imagination the metaphorical space that's been exercised in that metaphorical space to be able to think through the way God designed authority, right? So you have the freedom. So a lot of times when you talk about spheres of authority, Kuyperian spheres of authority, people actually think about circles, overlapping circles. But it's not circles, right? But because spheres. We haven't studied geometry, we haven't exercised our imaginations to think in 3 dimensions, we actually are misunderstanding what previous generations learned about the way God set up the authorities in the world. So when I think of myself as an individual, what jurisdictions do I exist in? To be able to think in terms of nesting solids is what Plato calls them, or to think in terms of nesting spheres, you can think about reality the way God actually designed it. There are multiple jurisdictions that I exist in, and they're overlapping, and you don't have, they aren't in competition with one another because they are intended to nest together. So that's, the liberal arts is about exercising the ability to think in all of the different arts of thinking and then pull them together into an integrated whole.
That's incredible. So whenever I talk to you, Farley, like cosmology always comes up. And that's literally what you've just described now. But before we get into the weeds of just even what cosmology is, let's contrast that with what is common today in the way people think and the way people are educated. How do you contrast someone who has been enculturated in the Christian liberal arts, and whatever secularized education is prevalent today?
Yeah. So if we're just talking about, let's say, jurisdictions and authority, when you don't have what most people are raised in is the kind of educational system that John Dewey came up with, which is designed for training cogs in the economic machine or the political machine. So, and now conservatives think the goal is to raise the people into the economic machine, and liberals think the goal is to raise them into the political machine. But they agree that people are being raised up to become cogs in the machine. They just disagree on the nature of the machine.
It's a dehumanizing venture either way.
Right, it is. So rather than thinking in terms of a whole person made in the image of God who is designed to do a lot of different things, that is given a series of jurisdictions in their life, and it's their job to take dominion in those jurisdictions and guard in those jurisdictions and bring them to God's intended end. They think in terms of how do they fit into the how do they fit into the collective, right? So, and that way of thinking it's fundamentally about power, right? The collective is about power, and you disagree. The left and the right disagree on what the source of the power is, but they don't disagree generally on the nature of the world. That this world is a power game that we're all playing in, and that's a lot of that comes down to a lack of imagination. You know, when you read broadly about politics throughout history, you see that this left-right dichotomy. You've got this large span of political options that you have in the scriptures. You have God setting up His people in a series of different political structures. Then you have every nation has its political history with a series of different political structures. You've got all sorts of legal structures. There's a lot for us to take in and then imaginatively bring together in the moment. Well, the left and the right are so close together on our political spectrum that we think it's the entire spectrum of possibilities when you've got this broad number of options.
People who only see in black and white, but they don't actually see that the world is full of so much more color.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And so a liberal arts education, you read somebody like Caesar, you read say Chaucer or Dante, and read at different time periods. They have different political categories, right? Different imaginative categories for their politics. When you take that in and understand it, and give it a gracious reading, and then it actually expands your imagination such that you're better at solving problems. But in the modern educational system, it's not the goal. The student doesn't grow up and solve problems. Yeah. The student grows up and fits into the system, right? Because the system is the most education is collectivist, meaning that the system as a whole is the point, and the individuals, they're eggs for the omelet, but the omelet is the point. In a traditional Christian understanding of the human race, made in the image of a triune God, there's not competition between the corporate and the individual. Right? The corporate and the individual are. Sin gives us the illusion of rivalry between the corporate and the individual, but that's not intended.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's actually a good segue into just speaking about the significance of cosmology. And one of the things I think that's really helpful in understanding it is cosmology as an understanding of the way God has set up the universe, the cosmos as a whole. It flows, I think, out of the sovereignty of God. It's much broader than simply having Christian responses to a variety of questions. And it's really about seeing all things as governed by God, but and not just like in really confined, narrow categories, but as an interrelated whole of sorts. How far off am I as I'm trying to describe?
Yeah, no, that's. I think it's there's a lot of it. I think good positive advances to worldview apologetics and thinking in terms of worldview. And what I've always found interesting is that when we talk about worldview, one of the things we don't end up talking about is what kind of world is this, right? What kind of cosmos do we live in? What is this place as a whole that God has created, and how does it fit together? And this is part of a good liberal arts education. When you read outside your own time, it's one of the ways that you learn to sort of see the back of your own head, see the things that you are assuming, because everybody assumes. Everybody assumes. You see that some of those things are assumptions, and you can actually investigate them when is it a valid assumption? Is it a good assumption to have? Right. And one of those things is cosmology. So, one of the things that I like to ask people is, stop and picture Earth. And then ask where did you picture Earth from? Yeah. Right. And almost everybody, it's really, really rare to find somebody that doesn't picture Earth from a place they've never been, meaning they picture it from space. right? They picture it from outside of Earth, and that's really an odd thing, right? If you would have asked somebody, say in 1300, picture Earth, well, they're going to look down, right? They're going to see the Earth from their own perspective.
Yeah.
But one of the things that's happened is that there have been shifts in the philosophy of the cosmos, in the cosmology, such that we now we think about a lot of things in our life, or a lot of our assumptions. We look at them from a perspective other than our own, right? Our own we live. We sort of imaginatively climb into the balcony of our minds and look down, and we don't imaginatively experience the world from our own perspective. And that's because of the cosmological assumptions that came along with late Enlightenment philosophy, modernism, postmodernism. That my perspective is an untrustworthy perspective, right? And then the disagreement between modernism and postmodernism is it possible for me to get to an objective perspective, right? My subjective perspective is not trustworthy. And then they disagree on whether or not you can get to an objective perspective. Well, but it's an assumption to say that my subjective perspective is not trustworthy, right? That's a cosmology question, right? That has to do with assumptions about what kind of creature I am and whether or not I fit into this place, right? Is this a place that I actually fit into? Is this a place that created me, right? In evolutionary philosophy tells us you fit into this place because it created you, but you fit into it as a rival. Right. There's not a solid place for you, but you were created by it, so you fit here. But you fit into it as a rival amongst rivals. Yeah. Well, all of those are assumptions that most of us, myself included, we just have. Yeah. We were raised in it. It's the water we swim in, but the scriptures present a cosmology in which God created exactly the kind of place that is. That is for creatures like you and me to be able to flourish in. But that's the kind of place we live in. It's the perfect place for creatures like us to flourish in. And then it's filled with all sorts of living creatures that also are the kind of creatures that can flourish in this sort of place. So in our sin causes us to live against nature, but because nature's on our side, when we become rivals with nature, when we become rivals with God, we end up rivals with nature as well, right? But it's intended to be on my side.
That's a great thesis and pitch for why climate alarmism is completely false.
Right, yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah, it is. I mean, climate alarmism is an example of an understanding that this place is the kind of place that's trying to kill you. Exactly. Right? It's out to get you. Right. And that is that fundamental assumption was there before Darwin came along, right? Darwin, all he does is give a mechanism for how we exist in a place like this, but the cosmological changes had happened before that. You wouldn't have gotten Darwinism if you wouldn't have had the cosmological shifts that happened before that.
Interesting. So I'm sure you've heard of the matrix of, the creation, fall, redemption, consummation. Some people use that to spell out the grand narrative. Some people use that to sort of flesh out worldview, Christian worldview as a whole. And recently I've been thinking about just how much people really tend to camp between fall and redemption, as if like that's the sum of all things. That's the sum of what's real in this world is fall and redemption. And I often like to now just emphasize, well, you don't understand fall without creation. You don't understand I think consummation without redemption. Like they're all connected. There's something big that's happening here. There's something so much bigger than fall and redemption. In fact, fall and redemption are not even the beginning of the story or the end of the story, right? Like there's something we were created for, created to, and there's something we've been redeemed to as well. How does if at all, does this way of thinking, creation, fall, redemption, consummation, fit into a cosmological vision of the world? Or is there more we need to be thinking about to really understand it correctly?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can think about it because, if you think about it in dramatic terms, we're in, the third act or fourth act, depending on if we're in a 4 or 5 act structure. We're somewhere in the middle of the story,
Sure.
but we know that there's a final act coming, and we can look back and we can see what that final act is going to be, because a good writer puts all the seeds of Act 5 in Act 1,
Right.
and when you look at it that way, it makes sense that we're headed towards a garden city. We began in a garden, right? That you start with that first Adam and you end with that last Adam.
Yes.
There's a really great book on how our cosmology and the way that we tell the story of history affects art by a rapper and poet named Sho Baraka, which is
Amisho Lewis.
Amisho is a great guy, but he's a brilliant writer, brilliant poet, and but he talks about how most Christians, when they go to make art, what limits them is that the story begins in the fall, right? The story doesn't begin in the garden in the way that they think, and so you end up with a lot of Christian art being squeezed down to a very limited number of possible stories to talk about, because the only thing if the fall is the beginning of the story, then the only thing that is important then is getting out from under sin.
Exactly.
Right.
But then here's the interesting thing is that people say, well, evangelism is the most important thing. That's what we need to be focused on. And you think like, well, yes, you're right. But the problem is you truncate your idea of what evangelism is, or even what the gospel is. Why is this good news? Right? Why is this the great evangelion? Why? And that's because there's so much more that's happening here. What Christ is reconciling as a whole is so much bigger than just turning people's hearts away from sin. He does that for a reason, and he's doing something so much bigger than that in real time,
Yeah, I think we get focused in on what we're saved from, and forget what we're saved to. Yeah, so we don't have that vision for why it is that God's restoring us, right? So it'd be like Adam, he's given the charge to garden the world, and then he falls from that. He falls from that position, and if the story comes along and he's just saved from his guilt, but he's not saved back to the garden, or back to gardening, back to the original mission, then really you don't have a very good story, right?
Exactly.
It's
not good news.
Yeah, it's not good news, because it's the kind of the "I'll Fly Away," which is a great song,
sure,
but
very escapist.
It's escapist,
yeah.
And we need escape, but it's sort of a escape to a life of always on the run. Right? You're not escaping back into life again. You got out of prison, but now you spend the rest of your life on the run from the gardening that we're called to do. So because we were dislodged from our original mission. But if we don't get back to that original mission and complete the project, well, then the devil actually wins in the long run, right? In the story. But because we know that the fifth act is, behold, I make all things new. The fifth act is the resurrection at the end of time, the return of Christ, the resurrection, and then living into the completion of Adam's original mission above and beyond. We know that's the direction it's going. Well, by faith, if you know that, and we're living in the third act, we live towards that, and in that way, we bring that fifth act into the present, and we get to live out of that resurrection now, right? And that's what justification is. At the end of time, you're going to be declared right. So by faith, you can begin you can trust that you are right with God now, even though the great white throne hasn't happened yet, right? The declaration, the final declaration of our being right with God hasn't happened yet. But the resurrection, which is the sign of that being right with God, snuck into history in the middle of, at the turning of the second and third act,
Sounds like Cosmology's post-mill,
Well, mine is.
As it ought to be. Yeah, that's awesome. One of the things you keep bringing up here is this word rivalry. And I don't think that's a careless word you're using. It's a very intentional word. In one sense, it presupposes that we're at enmity with things. But also, I think in the grand scheme of things, in our understanding of cosmology, in our understanding of what Christ is doing in this world, you kind of see this contrast between him being the Prince of Peace, the reconciler, and the world and its intent on always provoking tension and rivalry. How do we think about these things? Why do you keep using that word?
Yeah, the things that enter into the world when sin enters into the world are fear, guilt, shame, and rivalry, right? And the cross is the solution to all of those things, right? So our fear, our guilt, our shame, our rivalry are all swallowed by Christ or worn by Christ as he dies, and then all of those things are then buried in the ground, and he's raised, leaving those things underground. And then the church, as his body, is continuing to go through the world and solving those problems, right, as it goes. Right. Well, in the modern world, people don't feel the guilt and shame like we once did, right? Guilt it's an objective legal category, but it's also something that we can be convicted. Right. We can be convicted internally that there is a legitimate external conviction, right? It's all legal language when we talk about, that was very convicting. Right. That is the internal feeling of recognition that there's an external guilt problem, right? There's a real guilt problem. But guilt is a lot less common. I mean, objective guilt is common still, but the feeling of guilt is a lot less common. Shame is a little bit more common. But Christ died bearing our shame, or he died naked wearing our shame and nailed our shame to the cross, buried it in the tomb. Fear is a little bit more common, right? People live their lives with a lot of just general feelings of terror. But rivalry is something that everybody recognizes in every direction right now. And a lot of the feeling of rivalry is anxiety, right? And we live in a world filled with anxiety. Where we feel dislodged from any sort of place, right? We don't have any place where we say, this is where I fit. We believe we're rivals with creation. We're rivals with our neighbor. We're rivals with political the political climate is a rivalrous climate. Our families are filled with rivalry. And rivalry is an understanding of the world that there is limited resources and we have to fight for our share. And if we don't fight for our share, we won't get our share. Survival of the fittest, right? We live in a time when the fundamental engine of we believe that the fundamental engine of everything is rivalry, right? Whether it's communist socialist politics, whether it's laissez-faire capitalism, whether it's evolution, social Darwinism, everything is that rivalry is the engine of everything. Well, but when Christ comes, he's what he tells us is that the opposite of rivalry is love. Right? Consider others as better than yourselves.
Right. For perfect love casts out fear.
Perfect love casts out fear. Yeah. Greater love has no man than this, than one that lays down his life for his friends, right? So love is the solution to all of them. Right. And but the opposite of rivalry is love. And so when he comes and he says, love your enemies, that's something that as modern Christians, and I'm sure it's never been easy, but as modern Christians, we don't have an imaginative category for it because we've bought into this understanding that rivalry is an engine. Even if we would say, well, no, it's not the most fundamental engine. Right. But when we talk about virtues, most of the time we talk in the negative, right? We don't think of love as the fundamental engine of reality, right? But we live in a world that is created by the overflowing loving generosity of God, right? This whole place is made of love, right? Why did God create any of us or create any of this, right? He created out of the overflowing, generous love that has existed for all eternity between the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, right? So why did God create the world? Well, because he loved his son. He wanted to glorify him. Why was Jesus raised from the dead? Well, because the Holy Spirit was poured out, and the power of the Holy Spirit, which is love, raised Jesus from the dead. Right. So all of everything from top to bottom is love. Rivalry is the opposite of that. So the modern understanding of the kind of place we live in is literally at direct odds with reality.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I think that's actually mind-blowing. And I think there's actually something to that as well, is just the potency of love. Because I think love in many quarters can seem soft. It can seem like it's appeasing, like that's all it is. Just let people do what they want. It's all about tolerance. And that's how people have sought to redefine love. In fact, it's kind of, I hope I don't go down another rabbit trail here.
The rabbit trail is the point. I learned that from George Grant.
Exactly. There's a sense in which the world is trying to set its own cosmology. Yeah. Right. And I think part of that is the redefinition of words. It's words in a sense that give rise to the cosmos. God speaks and cosmos comes into existence. And there's a sense in which we get to be partakers of that when God gives Adam the mandate to essentially name the world. He's doing something of cosmological significance in that moment. And I think the serpent knew that, which is why he was trying to redefine words, trying to redefine what God really said. And you see that continuing over time. And I think one of the ways that you see this in modern times especially is the redefinition of what love is. And I think that even as Christians, we can tend to then almost just shy away from that because we've allowed the world to dictate what love actually is. Right. But I think a right understanding of it should almost inspire us with courage or fill us with courage to actually do something, because this love is clearly very potent to reorder the world. Right. There's a sense in which God's enemies, God has no rivals in that sense. He really doesn't. Yeah. Right. And through his love, we conquer, Right.
And I think God having no rivals, that's a good summary of the first 500 years of Christian philosophical and apologetic thought.
Right.
Leading up to Maximus the Confessor, in his Centuries of, I believe it's called the Centuries of Love, where he develops the doctrine of the creator-creature divide, right? That God, he literally in every way there has no rivals, right? He has a different sort of, a good way to put it is God is not a thing. Everything else is a thing. Right. God is not a thing. He's a different sort of being. Right. He is an independent being. And it depends on nothing, and everything depends on him. Right? There's
even his enemies.
Even his enemies depend on him. Yeah. There's no there's no possibility of rivalry because he is a different sort of being altogether. And that is the being that crossed the creator-creature divide in order to become incarnate, right? So and that all of that motivation is love. The Father sent Jesus to be incarnate because he loved him, and he knew that the way to his name being the name above every name and to receiving the glory of every knee bowed and every tongue confessing was the paths of the dead, through the cross, death, and resurrection, right? The Father said, I love you and want to see you glorified. So he sent him. When Jesus arrives and he says, I'm just here to do the will of my Father, right? And he directs us to praise the Father when he says, I'm going to go away to prepare a place for you. He directs us to praise the Spirit. The Spirit is coming and he will be your comforter, right? So the motivation within the Trinity is this self-giving, selfless love. So it is selfless, but selfless is is defined in the negative, right? It's like trying to replace tolerance with love. Tolerance is a non-action, right? Love is an action, right? Exactly. So self-giving love is the motivation that each of the persons of the Trinity has, right? This is how God can seek his own glory without being selfish, right? Because the Father seeks the glory of the Son and the Spirit, and the Son seeks the glory of the Spirit and the Father and the Spirit. How do we know that it's the Spirit of God? He lifts up the name of the Father and the Son, right? He doesn't draw glory to himself. He gives glory, right? So there's the fundamental creative force that brought us into existence is love, right? So it's a fully different sort of, when the modernist view of the world that bases everything on rivalry, it's like, trying to build a house on the attic. Yeah. Right. You've flipped the whole thing, and so it's no wonder that it's crumbling under the weight, right? Because the house is upside down.
So Jason, in light of this, how do we then live? I mean, if we believe that to be true, that absolutely changes the way we live, or at least it ought to.
Right.
Right. How do we live in light of that?
Well, what's great about it, so I was just reading on his blindness, Milton's sonnet that he wrote after he went blind, and he's trying to work through what is it? Does God expect day labor when he's taken away the light, right? What do I do with myself now that I've gone blind? And there's this wonderful line where he says, well, he sits kingly with all of his attendants, and he hasn't called me to do anything yet, but that doesn't mean his work isn't getting done, right? He looks around and he says, well, perhaps I'm not that important, right? And he takes comfort in that, and he says, and the man waiting to be sent is serving the king just as much as the man who's been sent, right? And so he says, well, I can rest in the fact that I'm not that important. Now, he's John Milton. He was about to write the great, probably the most influential epic, outside of maybe Dante and Homer. Yeah. He's about to transform the English language and to fundamentally marry Christianity into the English language forevermore, right? He's about to do that. Right. And he's sitting there going, Lord, am I even important? Well, I guess I'm not that important, but here I am. I'll do what you send me to do. Yeah. Right. But so the first thing is it reorients what it means to be important, right? Because the importance no longer has to do with power, right? Importance has to do with, well, what jurisdiction has God given me? Yes. And how do I say, yes, Lord, to the king? And then we have our marching orders. We're sons of Adam, daughters of Eve. We are we are of the priestly race, right? That God established in the garden. That says, and what do we do? We garden it, right? So what's the jurisdiction God has given me, and how do I garden it, right? And sometimes that's a physical space. Milton's, I think, a great example where words were the jurisdiction that God gave him, and the rumor was in his lifetime that he had read every book in print that was available on English soil, right? There weren't as many books, because Solomon is right, of the making of books, there's no end, and now there's somewhere around 1 million books a year published, so couldn't do that anymore. But words were the tools that he had at hand because he was blind and he was a great poet. So he set to work, how do I garden the English language, right? How do I take dominion over it and bring it to its intended end? So if you're if you're working in the arts, how do you take hold of it? When I spent some time getting to work writing comedy, right? It was, the hardest job and the most fun job I've ever had, right?
Right.
And it's mostly because I was a writer, it's mostly a word dominion task, right? And what's the job of a comedian? Was to make people laugh, right? That's the job. So you get as good at it as you can. How do I make people laugh? How does comedy work? How does you take hold of it like Adam taking hold of the garden and saying, that's my job to and the first thing that God does is he brings Adam into a garden in which nothing is grown, and he makes it all grow up right in front of him, right? He says, let me show you, right here, this is the garden. Now take dominion of it. So part of that then becomes, well, what's the history that's come before? How is God funny in the Bible, right? How does humor in the Bible work? How have the people that have done this job well before me done it, and really understand your craft? And then how do I improve it, right? How do I get better at it? How do I practice it? And what's great is it takes it out of the realm of just a straightforward, I judge this by did I make money? Did I make money? Did I gain power? Right? That that's as a biblical capitalist, I believe that money is how you exchange value, right? So people, if you never make any money at your job, you're probably doing the wrong thing.
Exactly.
But it's not simply a matter of am I making the most possible money right now? I was talking to a gentleman who was a very, very talented, very talented musician. He was scoring movies and TV shows, and he got a job that looked like it was going to be a dream job. And then he gets the script and he opens it up, and he says, "Oh man, I cannot do this job as a Christian, right? As a big time HBO show." And he walks away from it, right? And they told him, we're not coming back to you for something else. Like, this is your big shot. And he says, this is, it's not HBO, it's porn. Or no, wait, it's the other way around. It's not porn, it's HBO. Right? He says, I can't do this.
Yeah.
He walks away and walks away knowing the Lord is pleased with me, and the value of the pleasure of the Lord is a lot more than money, right? So you've got to navigate all of those things, especially in the arts. But you no longer are simply judging the value of what you're doing with the same with the success of the world's categories.
It sounds to me like what you're actually painting is a picture of humility and ambition, or humility and glory. Humility where you kind of, you know who you are, you know your place in the world, right? That's kind of what the cosmology gives you. But then the ambition is what now you're aiming for. It's that glory. And I actually think that those two are very correlated. When people think of humility and ambition, they think of those things as rivals. Yeah. When in fact, no, I actually think that only the humble can truly be ambitious. I think that what God's enemies tempt people toward is actually a lesser glories, not greater glories, right? And I think we need to recover this sense of glory and ambition as Christians. In fact, I'd say that that's actually one of the ways that you know you're really bowing before God, that you really are humble. And I think that then applies to all things, including vocation, including to the writing of comedy and, all the things that we could do. Speaking of which, Jason, now I want to kind of apply this. There's a sense in which everything that we're trying to do here at New St. Andrews College, in a sense, is giving people this cosmology. And the goal is to churn out leaders who are going to shape culture living faithfully under the lordship of Jesus Christ. But what does that look like, especially in 2025, in 2026, 2027, as in this present moment that God has given us to shape and mold? What does it look like to apply that cosmology? What areas do you think we need to be focusing on building?
Yeah. There's a lot of them, and there's different. One of the things that, just as I've gotten older, I could say that now because I've got a little bit of gray in my beard. But as you get a little bit older, you realize
You're a grandfather.
I'm a grandfather now. It's incredible.
Yeah.
My wife has been telling our kids since they were really little. So we had you so that you'd give us grandchildren.
There you go.
Right?
Yeah. I've already been giving my kids
Right.
that speech, So
got our first grandchild, and it's amazing to watch your kids grow up. But one of the I think the central errors that a lot of especially young Christian men in particular make is they think that ambition that ambition involves getting to tell people what to do.
Yeah.
Right. Rather than understanding that if you garden your plot well, if you grow the best grapefruit, people will come and say, "How did you do that?" Right. We think we start looking around at everybody else and saying, I could fix you if you just listen. I could fix you. You're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. And we get into a posture of criticism, and we grow in that posture of criticism rather than thinking in terms of what has the Lord given me? How can I improve as a craftsman in what God has given me? Understanding that the craftsman that does his job well will stand before kings, right? That's a good and right ambition to be and to advise kings, to be king. All of that is good and right, a good and right ambition. But the path to it is different than what we think when we're young men, right? We think that if I'm criticizing, if I live my life in a posture of criticism, then everybody will start to take me seriously and want to know my advice, rather than understanding that if you work as a craftsman, then you will end up with the kind of influence that it's good to have an ambition towards. But you've got to actually grow in your craft. So whatever it is, whether it's a plumber, electrician, if you're a janitor, a lawyer, whatever it is, how can I be the best possible, whatever God has given me to do? Treat it as a craftsman. Right. Take seriously that I am a descendant of Adam, and look at the world and say, how can I garden this, right? Whatever it is, and extend your imagination as a craftsman into what it is that you're doing, knowing that if you garden well, you end up with extra seed to expand your garden, right? And living with that sort of ambition it takes humility, it takes patience, but it also takes resisting the temptation to live your life as a critic, which is difficult in an age of rivalry.
In an age of rivalry, as demonstrated through Twitter trolls and such.
Of which I've met my fair share.
Right, exactly. That's so good. Well, Jason, what hath cosmology to do with comedy? I mean, like, you've written comedy. You and I talk about music all the time as well. One of the things that I love about what you're doing is you're tangibly trying to shape culture in a way through entertainment in a lot of ways. How should people be thinking about this? What does it look like to for Christians to shape something like comedy, for example? I mean, like, one thing that comes to mind is I think comedy is a fundamental gateway to a people's affections.
Yes.
Like, if you really want to arrest people's affections, ask them, ask what makes them laugh. Ask them what gives them a sense of joy, giving them a perspective of the world that they find humorous, right? And there's a direct tie between that and people's affections. What does that look like in this day and age when comedy is, sure, I say often vulgar, but also risky, right? Like, it's a cutthroat world,
It is.
What does it look like to wield influence in that arena?
Yeah, well, wielding influence, that's a good question. I haven't thought as much about that.
Yeah.
But in terms of taking dominion in comedy, one of the reasons. So when my wife was wanted to become a comic when I met her, and I interrupted her life and got her pregnant 4 times.
Nice.
And,
Well done.
all of the,
As a good man should.
as a good man should. But she and I have continued to together work towards getting good at the craft of comedy throughout our lives. And one of the things that we learned is that our kids didn't, as you're raising kids, they don't grow up and then doubt things they laughed at and laughed about, right? Because laughter is not something you choose to do, right? Laughter is something that sort of happens to you, right? It just jumps out of you, because of that, there's some sort of direct connection to the heart with laughter. So we tried to develop a house and especially a dinner table that was full of laughter, right? My wife takes comedy very seriously. And so she used to make our kids, if their joke didn't land, she would stop and say, well, let me tell you why this didn't work. We're going to try that again. Let's work on your timing. She'd say, no child of mine is going to have bad comedic timing. But because by laughing and laughing together, you're training your kids, right? They're imitating what it is you love, right? And there's other ways to do it. My growing up, I still love all of the bands my dad shared with me, right? He loved Mozart, he loved Led Zeppelin, he loved Three Dog Night. Those bands I still love, right? Because I learned how to love music from a dad that loved music, and he would say, "Okay, we're going fishing, we're going on a trip." I went and got this Simon and Garfunkel album for us to listen to on the drive, right? He wanted to share what he loved with us. Yeah. You take that with you forever, and often as parents, what we do is we end up reacting to our kids, worrying, living in fear, and we end up not sharing what we love. And sometimes it's because we're ashamed, right? We let shame get wrapped around the spokes so much because we haven't really brought our past life to Christ and trusted that His death on the cross really did bury our shame, and so we don't have to live in shame. But we don't share what we love with our kids. Laughter is a risk. Comedy is a risk. It involves a lot of risk. This is why stand-up comedy produces some of the great writers, is because you've got an immediate feedback loop about, is this working? Do I need to change it? Do I need, so the way that I've approached comedy writing is by really trying to dig in, understand how it works, and then when I'm working on something, to just consistently take the risk of putting it out there, right? When I'm working on a new joke or a new bit, my wife does the same thing. I can tell when she's got a bit she's working on because I hear her tell the same thing to different groups of people. And she, when you're working on it, to take the risk of trying it out, right? So when I'm working on a comedy screenplay, at first it used to bug my wife some. She'd be like, oh, why do you do that? And I was like, I got to find out if it works. And then she's like, oh, I get it. So she's like, I know that if he's whatever screenplay he's working on, wherever we go, he's going to pitch it because he's practicing pitching it right now because he's working on it, right? So everybody is a part of my writer's room when I'm working on something. Right? But it's that commitment, and every craft takes this kind of commitment. Comedy takes the kind of commitment that you are willing to risk a joke not landing, right? You're willing to, or, I've got my friends that I send something to when I'm not sure if it's over the line yet or not, because they know that it's a craft error, not a sin, right? They're not going to come back and say, hey, that joke, it's possible to write a sinful joke. Right. The book of Leviticus tells us that you're not allowed to laugh at blind people tripping, right? There's, so God understands that there are limits to what you can't laugh at, or he's told us that. Right. But I've got friends that understand the craft of comedy that I can share a joke with, say, is this too far? And they'll tell me, oh yeah, that was too far, and this is why, right? So I know to reel it back into when it's not too far, right? But learning to risk, take the risks that it takes to grow in your craft, and it's the same, it's the same if you're, it's the same way you learn plumbing, right? You put together pipes and then something leaks, and you go, oh, it leaked. Why did it leak? And you investigate and you figure out, what did I do wrong? And then you do it better next time, right? Yeah. Every craft works the same way, where for the most part, you have to just get in there and do it, and be willing to take the risks of making errors in order to get better and better and better at something. So the great, the really great carpenters are really great carpenters because they've made the most mistakes. Right. Yeah. They understand what not to do with every kind of wood because they've made that mistake with every kind of wood. Right. So whatever you are called to by God, treat it like a craft. Be willing to take those risks and understand that when you're really good at something, you get promoted into more jurisdictions.
The reward of good work is more work, right? In that sense. Yeah, it is. Jason, thank you. I honestly don't think I could ever get enough time speaking with you, but it's always such a good time. And I want to throw out as well, I'm so grateful for our friendship. You and Aaron have literally become like family to me and my family. So thank you so much. And
thanks for having me. And we love you guys.
Yeah. Let's do this again. I want to end with a toast, even though you've got your water all finished there, and I'll let you call it. What do you want to toast to today?
Let's toast to the hippopotamus. Okay. The funniest of all speedy mammals.
Absolutely. The speediest of the mammals.
The speediest of the mammals.
Cheers.